All right, hello everyone. Let's get started. My name is Leah King Kaufman. I am a program manager here at Leading Edge, and I work primarily with the employee experience survey and all of the great things that come after it, like your consultations and after survey actions. And I'm joined today by my colleague Melissa Walters, who'll be hanging out in the chat, and our presenter Liz, who will introduce herself in a moment. We're really excited today to kick off our September After Survey Actions theme, which is compensation. So this month we're talking all about compensation. We have several more webinars scheduled discussing salary and benefits. And today we wanted to really start by laying a foundation to think about compensation broadly. So we're thinking about, before we even get to salary and benefits, what does your organization have to offer? What do you do to attract folks, even if salaries can't be as competitive, for example? Our survey data tells us time and again how proud employees are to work for their organizations and to work towards achieving a mission. And so we want to think about how can we leverage that pride for the work that they do. So I'd like to turn it over to Liz to get us started.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. It is so nice to have everyone join today. For those of you that might have joined last time, it's wonderful to see you again. And if you didn't join last month, just to take a moment to introduce myself, my name is Liz Colhane. I am the dedicated senior people scientist here. So I get to work with Leah and Melissa and Dana and the whole team when it comes to designing the survey, walking through the results, and also thinking really about the strategy of what additional resources we can provide to you all as well, and how we can integrate some of our offerings, which is why we are here today. My background is in industrial organizational psychology, and I have been working in the field now for almost 16 years, looking at employee engagement and performance, with the majority of that coming from the Department of Defense for a little over 12 years. And I worked in healthcare also prior to coming to Culture Amp. So that's just a little bit about my background, kind of to lay the land of what we're going to walk through today. I figure if you feel like you would like to chat, I will ask questions and ask you to come off mute and use the chat button. But because I can't see everyone's faces and I only get to see a few of you across the top of mine, I don't want to miss anyone that has a question or wants to speak. So please feel free, come off mute at any point and interrupt. Feel free to make this conversational. So I would love to make you feel heard and seen when you're hearing this, and make sure that you leave here with any of your questions you have answered as well. So please feel free to make it as interactive as you would like. We will have time at the end as well for questions, and then I can also stay on after people go off if there's questions you wanted to ask about privately as well. So we can go ahead and get started, kind of just walk you through what today is going to actually be about though. I put together a quick agenda that just kind of highlights where we're going. So the first thing we're going to do is define what an employee value proposition or an EVP is. So here we're going to first go take a look at what do we mean by this? How are we going to define this? How do we define this at Culture Amp? So that you all can start to think about how you define it as well. We're going to, of course, discuss why this matters, right? So if we're going to put this time and effort into thinking about it, we want to know the impact it's going to have. We're going to talk about the growing importance that this is having on organizations in terms of putting their culture first, especially during things like the Great Resignation. We saw a lot of increase in a lot of employees putting more focus on this during that time as well. We're also going to define the key qualities. So we'll talk about, what makes them successful. How do we carry these out? How do we get folks to communicate these? How do we get folks to understand what they are? And then, of course, we'll want to provide you with a strategy for how you can actually create these or focus or grow the ones you've had. And we'll talk a lot about how we can do that through your listening strategy, through your data that you already have, and what we can use so that you're not having to start from scratch from that as well. So hopping right into it and defining what this is. An EVP is just the value of the benefit. So it's the perceptions of the value of that benefit an employee perceives, where they perceive it to be obtainable by serving as an employee of that organization. So inherent in this concept or in this definition is the social exchange or the psychological contract that is going to exist between that employee and between that organization. So it's that relationship that is occurring there. So according to the research, when we look at this, there are 5 components that we really focus on when we think about what an EVP is. And we want to think about this, as Leah mentioned, as going beyond compensation. So that might be the first thing that comes to our mind, and that might be where a lot of people think about, but where can we actually dig deeper into this? And this is going to extend to all of those additional areas that your employees need to be successful at work. So here is the list of the components. The first one is being that developmental value. And this is focusing on things such as growth and the development opportunities. So if you think here and you want to think about this from your survey perspective, you can even go back and link that to where you were on that for your specific organizations and where you fell on learning and development. We have the economic value. So that's going to be your total rewards and compensation, but it's also going to be things such as stock options, benefits, soft perks, the time off, the flexibility in work schedule. So again, going beyond that idea of compensation that we're thinking about at the very beginning. And then of course we have our interest value. So our job interest alignment, or is this job challenging? Is it stimulating? Is it encouraging creativity and innovation within myself? And is it resulting in products and services that I believe in and creating this work-life balance? So this can also, when we think about the interest, include the organization's mission statement and their social responsibility. And when we think about leading edge, we really think a lot about your results as I'm creating this presentation and thinking about it. And this is an area that you all excel at. So if we think back to your survey results, and again, this is speaking at leading edge overall, when we look at the interest area, 81% favorability for believing your organization is generally successful in the pursuit of your mission. We had 89% favorability for knowing how your work contributes to the mission, and a 91% favorable score for having a good understanding of your mission. So again, we can see this is an area that your organization is already succeeding in. And this is something to think about as we talk about how do we build out your EVP, is making sure that we're aware of what we're already doing good at. And this is an area that's really can be seen as we look through your data results. And then we have the application. And that is the opportunity to apply your knowledge and your expertise that you bring to the organization in your role on a daily basis. And then lastly, we have the social component. So this is work environments such as your supervisor support, your colleagues, having friends at the organization. This is the things where we're thinking about it. This is where we do activities maybe outside of work. And in this post-pandemic world, when we think about where we're at right now, EVPs are so much more important, and so much more important to focus on these areas outside of just compensation that we traditionally focus on as well. So looking here, I pulled up a few examples just to give you an idea of some organizations that have really good EVP examples. So again, we'll start with a general one, and then I also brought a nonprofit example to the table as well. But the first one here is Yelp. So this is one of our other clients, and we work with them. And it's a great example of an organization with a strong brand that also has an exceptional EVP. So one of Yelp's core values is playing well with others, highlighting the social value and importance of community among their employees. So additionally, they have developmental and economic attributes that work towards the health and well-being as a core component of their EVP. And then thinking about this from other perspectives as well, Red Cross is a great example, because when you look at their EVP, they talk about dedicating to improving the lives that they serve, treating others with respect, so they bring in that, working together as a family and a partnership, and embracing diversity and inclusiveness. So you can see how the EVPs can vary amongst organizations, but how they have different components of each of those areas we spoke about a few minutes ago. So here is just showing the growing importance of this and why it matters. These 3 areas highlight the movement organizations have been continuously moving towards, and this idea of being culture first or people first is another way that we hear some of our clients talk about it as well. It's essentially having this competitive advantage of culture when employees have other options. And the simple business case highlighted through the research findings will show you why this is important. So instead of essentially concentrating on first on the end result, our culture first focuses first on the employee as the driver of that performance. So we think about it a little bit differently when we're looking at it through this lens. And this is important for many reasons and is a focus area for many organizations because we know that highly engaged clients come from highly engaged employees. So what makes your organization engaged when you think about it? When you think, what's that special formula or that special sauce that makes your organizational culture first? If we start to think about this, that's the recipe for how you make your EVP. So you may find that an organization is doing well and employees are happy to be there, but knowing what's driving that engagement is the formula for making the momentum intentional. So the idea behind this is really that intent. So we want to leverage the bits of that culture that are working, like we talked about before in that relationship that you all have with the favorability scores, and really double down on those bits as part of your offerings to existing employees and potential employees as well. You can think about this from a recruitment perspective as well. So when we think about this, the question really is, what makes your organization culture first? That's how you would define your EVP. And the goal again is to be intentional. So I'm going to ask anyone if they want to come off mute and to answer the question when you start to think about your organization, where you're at currently, how does your organization put people first? So if someone were to ask you that on the streets walking by, what is one way that you can say your organization puts people first?
Hi, I'm Eileen Freed. I'm the executive director of the Jewish Federation in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I would say for us, it's flexibility, which is flexibility we offered prior to the pandemic, but maybe it's a little bit more formalized now where we have a hybrid model. We do have expectations of people being in, but also thinking about how some people might work differently and how we might be able to create an environment in which they can work differently, or even just with the flexibility. We know some people will put in extra hours, so I don't want people putting in PTO because they have to go to the doctor's appointment because they're going to make that up. And they know that and repeating that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And that's such a perfect example of not only a way to lean into what your organization can offer, but honestly, one of the drivers of why folks were leaving their organization after the pandemic when they had returned to office full-time, some of that. So there were people that definitely were leaning in towards that, maybe they did different arrangements with their children and couldn't get them put back in daycare and didn't have the ability. So really having that as an option has been very valuable for a lot of organizations. Any other thoughts from anyone? Let me check the chat too. Oh yeah, so Sandra, I'm calling you out on the chat. Thank you for putting that in there, but the employee resource groups. So what a great way to show how much your organization values diversity, promotes an inclusive environment, and also gives people an opportunity to make those social connections. So if we think back to that social perspective from the overall framework, what a great way to link that as well. Anyone else? I'll give it another 15 seconds in case anyone else has any other thoughts on what your organization does to put your people first. Okay.
We at Connie Cantor Samus Foundation in Seattle, Washington, we implemented a very generous family leave policy, not just for birthing parents, but really for anyone that's on a family or medical leave, where our state provides some benefits, and we said, we're going to make you whole for the entire time that the state benefits, we're covering a portion of salary. So really putting people in a position where their decision about when to return to work after a medical leave was not based on financials at all, because they were getting full salary.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that must give folks the comfort and not the fear of dealing with additional stuff, which is going to make them more resilient. Their well-being is going to be better. So it just trickles into so many other aspects of not only their work life, but their personal life, which, as we know, eventually get commingled, right? So wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I'm seeing the chat also. So Linda was saying that they asked the employees not to email outside of business hours, 9 to 5, to honor personal time. I love that. So setting boundaries, again, protecting your high performers from getting burnout, putting in restrictions. That's wonderful. I've seen other organizations that do that, or they'll also have like no meetings after 1 on Friday or 2, whatever that may be, so that people can wrap up their work week. All of these things, again, feel like you're protecting your employees and you're providing them, again, with those additional areas outside of compensation. So this is where you can't really put that number value on, but again, this is how we distinguish our organization from our competitors, but also from how we retain and get new employees as well. So thank you all for sharing.
We also allow, hi, my name is Linda Johnson. I'm from the JCC of Orange County. We also offer a free gym for all of our employees, which also we have, like, I don't know if it's considered an Olympic sized pool, but we also have a pool here. And we really encourage our employees to work out during their lunchtime or before class or before work or after work. And I would say we have a very high volume of our employees who actually take advantage of that. And I just find that they tend to balance themselves out when it comes to work balance versus health balance. So I found that that's been very, very helpful. And also full-time employees also have their immediate family have free membership as well.
Wow, that's amazing. When I worked at the Department of Defense, was at a Air Force base for 12 years. So had a gym on site, and I did contracting work where the government employees had that and would do that. And the love for that perk was known throughout our entire organization. So I can only imagine, especially the fact that you all continue to offer that to family members as well is amazing. I'm seeing a few more pop up in the chat. This is perfect. So going up here, professional development allowances. So this is wonderful as well. So the question was asking if we know if anyone offers them, and Katie said that you all do. So that, again, that professional development allowance through the PEO plus additional for employee. There's an annual allowance, it looks like, based on position level. So maybe depending with your organization, there looks like there's some of that as well, which is great, especially if it's an area that they want to upskill themselves in, because it could maybe help for potential promotion. We know that career and development is a driver of that as well. So that's really nice to see. We also see unlimited sick time so that employees don't, that's wonderful, feel the need to work while they're sick in order to save their PTO. The fact that it can be anything medical related for self or family members. So that's got to be really nice for caretakers. If you have children or you're taking care of a parent, a lot of ways that could go into many aspects of your employees' day-to-day life as well. And then we see here also internally and externally appropriate to position. So license renewal, if it's related to the job, again. So another area that is taking a financial burden away from one of your employees and helping them as well. So really wonderful, a lot of great things happening here as well, across, it looks like, a lot of your organization. So it sounds like even if you maybe came into this today, like not knowing what an EVP is or what yours is, I think talking through some of this even if it's not written out formal, it's very clear to see that it is ingrained in your organizations. There are areas that you all are already focusing on, and it sounds like from the examples that are shared that there's an appreciation amongst your employees for a lot of those benefits that you all were talking around as well. And this is really a great reminder, not necessarily part of the presentation, but on my little side note of being a people scientist and looking at data all the time, that as we go into those compensation conversations, that this is really a great opportunity to remind folks of the benefits that they have that are specific to their role or your organization, because maybe they heard about them when they onboarded 2 years ago and they forgot about a few of them that they would be really interested in using. So it's a great time to remind folks of what is already being provided to them as well. So, of course, we're talking about essentially the satisfaction, right? The importance of these EVPs during employee job markets. And especially if you think back to like the Great Resignation of 2021, 2022. That's a recent case study. That's where a lot of data was coming out of here. The one we're looking at here is from an NBC News article. And that's where they talked about this idea of this Great Resignation, referring to the idea that there were a significant number of people that will leave their jobs post-pandemic. And so they went ahead and started looking at what those numbers look like. And the talent economy had essentially shifted, and people were leaving their current jobs at higher rates than ever before. And what we saw because of this is the reasons for why they were leaving were different than before. So the number one reason we saw of why people were leaving, again, was that dissatisfaction with career options. So career development was and continues to be one of the strongest predictors of engagement as well as turnover. So just thinking back to some of those examples we were just talking about in career development, having that stipend or that additional money for development, paying for license, paying for those trainings, again, just areas of opportunity that you all are already focusing on. Desire for more flexibility. They wanted that flexibility. They no longer wanted excuses for why we couldn't work from home or why we couldn't be hybrid. Again, we talked about that as an example of an area that's doing that currently, providing that opportunity for their workers. That lack of humanity at work. So companies made hard decisions in 2020, and some of them made these decisions without adequate empathy or communication. And so we saw folks being upset as a result of that. And then we had those that said, you know what, I'm going to seek a new path. The pandemic shattered routines. It forced people to look at themselves differently, look about what they wanted to be doing. And some people thought about what do they want to do with their life? What are their new career goals? What can I continue to do with what I'm doing? And what path would I prefer to go on? A common one we saw this one was with nursing. We saw a lot of nurses leaving the field within this area. We saw a lot of teachers as they came back into the school leaving this. So again, seeking that new path, while some of it is out of our control as an organization, the stronger our EVP, the more aware our employees are around it, is ways to help mitigate some of these drivers of that resignation. And so during this time of employee movement, there was that large emphasis, right? There was a lot of folks that were looking at reducing turnover and retaining talent. And the second thing they wanted to do was figure out, how do we attract talent? So while the topic of reducing turnover is equally important, the EVP is really critical and is a strategic component of when you are attracting talent. This is how you can speak about your organization. And if these are listed in demands, in different domains that your organization really thrives in, areas that you're doing really well in, then this is an immediate competitive advantage. And it's really strong content, not only for the recruiters to talk about your organization, but also for the folks interviewing them as well, so that it continuously is getting brought up, is integrated into those conversations. So when an employee's values are fulfilled by an employer, they'll respond to this fulfillment with higher commitments, like we were talking about, to the organization. But they're also going to have greater organizational citizenship behaviors, or those discretionary behaviors. So employees who perceive that their expected EVP attributes are not adequately delivered, again, would be more likely to leave the organization. And that's really more likely going to be explained through the psychological contract of being breached and that social expectations not necessarily being met. So when we have that misalignment occurring. And the research has supported this by finding that a combination of an EVP and a strong psychological contract is going to enhance that intent to stay at the organization. So much so that organizations that deliver on their EVP can reduce turnover up to 69%, and they can increase new hire commitment up to 30%. So when we're looking at the data across organizations, these are big numbers here. And this was a research study that was done by Gartner that looked at that in particular. So when we also think about our EVPs, we want to think about the quality of them, what we're actually presenting and bringing to the table. So if we think about this from hygiene factors, so like fair and equitable pay, and motivating factors such as, belonging, growth, and development, it's not necessarily one or the other. It's an and. We have to have components of both of them. So we're wanting to look at that from both perspectives. So EVPs should be a combination of both tangible and intangible benefits. So knowing which each of these categories are your strong suit is then important. So you can pull from each of those areas so that intangible benefits function more transformatively and live more within your culture at your organization. So this includes your diversity, your inclusion, your growth, your development, those different areas. And together, these benefits, when articulated, are a significant part of how you achieve your company's mission and should be strongly tied basically back to that mission. So we always want to integrate it back into what you're doing and what your organization is driven by. So here, if we were to say, let's develop your EVP, there's going to be 4 main steps in developing it, with a heavy focus on leveraging and listening to your strategy that you've already been implementing through gathering feedback. So the organizational feedback process is going to be the heart of this task because it's going to already inform you of what current employees, as well as prospective and outgoing folks, feel about the organization. So these perceptions are key to informing the organizational strategy and will basically fuel your understanding about what you're doing well and what's actually impacting your employees. So leveraging your listening strategy will be important as you determine which benefits are most valuable, as well as later when you reevaluate your EVP to ensure it's still relevant, that you're still actively offering what you're providing, and that you're competitive. So as the market changes, we may want to evaluate our EVP and making sure we're keeping up with it as well. So I'm going to pause here for just a second. I'm going to open it up again. And if we were to think about looking at the steps of leveraging your listening strategy, defining your EVP, creating the narrative, or revisiting it, where are you all at your current organization in this process? And you can put it in the chat too as well. I can open that up. Does anyone know what their narrative is of their EVP? Or how they would speak about it in general? So maybe this is the first time we're kind of thinking about this. Oh, and there's some coming in here. So revisiting. So Connie was saying they did a major comp and benefit assessment a few years ago, didn't use this approach, but it sounds like even though it may not have been following through this approach, keeping in mind, we can go back and revisit and revise. Carrie's saying they don't have a defined EVP. Oh, an example, yeah. So if you just think back to the Yelp, or you think back to the Red Cross example, basically defining what it is that your organization that's specific offers to your employees, how you put your employees first. And a lot of times when defining it, it's kind of could be around your mission or your value statement, could be part of that EVP. This could be an area that you all go back and change based on competitors within the market. So it's really the area that's specific to your organization. And there's definitely different ways to get at it, which we'll talk about with that inductive versus deductive approach.
We oftentimes will dedicate our time to other services of the community.
Mhm.
For instance, we'll do food banks.
Yeah.
Or we do but get Christmas presents and send them out, to family members. And I find when you get the employees outside of their work environment, you really get to know who they are as a person.
Yeah.
And it just really brings the community together. We even have our board members do a lot of these outside services with us. And I just think that just shows their dedication to the J. And as I'm an HR consultant, actually, so I'm not actually an employee for the J, but I've been helping with their human resources for the last 12 years. So I love this community, and I love the way that the people work within each other outside of the company and here at work. So, and I think having that whole, we have a child care that's from 6 weeks old to pre-K or P, whatever they call it now, TK. And I think it's great because it's just, there's so much that goes on here. We have a theater, we have a main street that people come out and have their vendors come out and sell their stuff. So it's such a great place to go. And you obviously don't have to be Jewish, because we have all kinds of different people here from mixed cultures and stuff. So having that being said, I think it just brings our outside community in our facility and vice versa. So I think it works very well.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice. And it's nice to hear that you get to see, the real side of people outside, right? So you're doing something good. It makes you feel good. You get to see the best of them. They're choosing to be there, and with having the board members too, I think it provides that human aspect, that connection that we can all bond on, those core values and that want to do good and the overlap that we have. So that's wonderful. And what a great way to integrate into the community, right? Both in and out. Okay. So when we talk about, there's going to be different moments. So we talked about, this whole idea of listening, leveraging that listening strategy that we were talking about. So we're already collecting data, we're already having information. There's going to be moments throughout the employee life cycle that you can tap into to find, really where that EVP is. So if we think about it and we look at what surveys are being collected amongst various organizations, we can look at this from our onboarding surveys, our exit surveys, our engagement surveys. So an organization's listening strategy is going to have a wealth of data to answer that research question. What are we doing really well for our employees? So there are areas that you have probably gotten feedback from informally, those folks that may be talking about love going to the gym, so some of it we don't have to just get from the listening strategy, but where we need to fill in the blanks, we can get from this listening strategy. And embedded in those questions would be some sub questions that you can start thinking about. So why are applicants attracted to my organization? Why are they applying to this organization? What is drawing them in? What is in driving, employee engagement throughout their life cycle at the company? When employees do leave, why are they leaving? What is their reason? So we can start to also identify what it's not. Why are they, even though they've left the organization, what was not a problem? What was not one of the reasons? Because this could also impact your EVP. So thinking about your results as well, a great area for you to gather even more information is when you're going into your reports. If you think about those open-ended items and you go into them within the platform, you'll have those word clouds, and it's going to be, organized into the different themes that were results of, what's one thing we're doing well in our organization. You can go into that word cloud and you can easily see what had the most answers. Let's say there's 14 or 15 topic areas that populated. Do you keep in mind the size of those little bubbles? The larger the bubble, the more people responded on that topic area. So this is an area that is already at your fingertips, where you can see what employees are thinking about that are specific to your organization. And so really here is just an opportunity to essentially take advantage of what's already available to you. So this means even if you don't have a formal EVP, or if you haven't thought about it, you don't have to start from scratch. Let's take the information that was already given to us from the employees and work from there. And with this wealth of data at your fingertips, it could also start to feel like, oh gosh, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. There's so much happening here. But where we can start is by thinking about what are your organizational strengths and determining which of these strengths are meaningful to the employee engagement. So kind of looking at it from both those perspectives. So when there is little to no existing guess or beliefs about the strengths, it's common to begin with what we call this inductive approach, because there's no theory to test, right? So then when you believe you have a sense of why the employees value what they do and why they're drawn to the company, then we begin with this deductive approach. So this can be also the end result of your inductive approach. So it just looks at where you are at the starting point to kind of think about where do we go from here. So if it's at the inductive approach, this is that exploratory step that's taken to proceed that deductive approach. So this is where it's an important step to basically get that foundation, that understanding of why the employees feel and what they value. So here you would have 3 different steps. So you would have a question, you would observe a pattern, and then from there you would develop this theory. So once you did those 3 steps, this inductive approach would really have more steps within it. But this is what will lead you again to that next step. So if we get to the have a question, this is going to be usually pretty broad. So the idea of like, what are we doing well? Going back to that idea of, if you're starting from scratch, what are we doing well? We have that right here. How are we engaging our employees? The engagement survey data is going to be that great place to start. As I mentioned, this is an item that we already have. This is an item that we've already asked. It's also going to be a helpful source because you can look at areas that you're doing really well in outside of just those open-ended items as well. For the second step here, this is in the results. So you're going to essentially observe areas that are over the benchmark and have a high impact on engagement. So if both of those criteria are met, then we have a great hunch. So you can see here we have that work-life blend balance. So we see that it's favorable, and we can see that it's above that benchmark. So the favorability is also, again, very high. We have it here at 86%. So if we were focusing on this work-life blend, and the next step, we examine the impact. Again, we could see that that one was favorable, and it's above above the benchmark as well. So the qualitative data should be consulted to round out then the understanding of the actual data. So this example here, again, it's a little oversimplified. We're just showing you one example. There's probably going to be many more. This is only looking at one strength, but optimally, you'll examine your most favorable factors when you're in there, and the questions to identify a handful of your strongest qualities. And then that's where you would look into them further. So that would then conclude this idea of that inductive portion of the process, because once you've observed that pattern, you've developed this theory here that maybe flexible working arrangements are actually making an impact. Maybe that's why our work-life blend has increased. So now we would go from that inductive to that deductive approach. So now remember, this is sort of, you can think about it like an interactive process, right? So we're in between that inductive and that deductive approach. And if we don't have a strong starting point, maybe we would have began with that inductive, but you may either feed into those results, you may look into them, you may have a hunch, but essentially you want to eventually start that deductive approach. Now, if you already have an existing EVP in place and you're not starting from scratch, and you want to check to make sure that your recruiting processes are still aligned, the deductive approach is a great place to begin to test your existing EVP. So this portion of the process is meant to be more confirmatory, confirming what you expect to find here. So when conducting this deductive research, you'll always start with a theory. And for example, reasoning deductive means testing out this theories. So if there's no theory yet, you wouldn't conduct the research. So the deductive research is going to consist of these 4 ideas here, or these 4 steps. So you're going to start with your existing theory. You're going to formulate a hypothesis based on your existing theory. You would collect data to test that hypothesis from step 2. And then you would analyze the results to essentially look at, does the data reject or support that hypothesis in step 2? So here, let's say you're starting with your existing theory, and this theory can range in complex or how mature of a theory it is, depending on maybe how many iterations or how many processes have already taken place in your EVP process. So for our example, we'll use the top highlighted theory because it's a logical theory following that inductive approach that we talked about before. But the list below displays additional theories from various stages of your listening strategy. And the list would be if we didn't just go through an iteration of data collection, and maybe we were gleaning that information from the environment itself, for example. So this can be a combination of different ways in which you're creating all of these theories as well. So the next step is to translate this theory into a testable hypothesis that again will either support or reject with our data analysis. So we know that flexible working arrangements are impacting engagement in the organization.
It wasn't, that's why I turned it off.
And we know that it's above the industry standard. However, we need to confirm if this is consistent across all of your employees. So again, if you think about your employee engagement results, this is across the organization. So let's dive into this and see where there's differences and maybe pockets of your employees. So for instance, are folks leaving the organization suggesting the flexibility of work is an issue? If we think about it differently, are folks of all different tenures and age benefiting from the flexibility of work here? Is this working for people that are similar to those that we want to attract to our organization? So we're going to hypothesize this in very similar questions across the different groups. And again, just like the maturity of your theory, there will be variability in the maturity of your hypothesis, depending on how much information you have. So some initial hypothesis may be tested with whether or not work-life blend factor exceeds the benchmark. Some more mature or further iterations of this hypothesis may test the flexibility as part of the EVP by looking at, for example, candidate feedback and exit feedback to examine these employees' perceptions as well, or focus more closely on, for example, different performance levels was an area you could dig into. So essentially aligning your hypothesis with your talent goals will result though in the most useful data for your EVP. And then we move into that third step where we need to collect our data. So if we go back to our original hypothesis, are folks of all tenure and age benefiting from the flexibility of work here? Is this working basically essentially for similar to those we'd like to attract in an organization? So keeping those hypotheses in mind, we could take 2 approaches here. So the most ideal may be that there's no differences across the subgroup demographics. Maybe that's what we find. This would mean that we can ensure that this is a component of our EVP that is valued by all of our employees. and could easily fit into our external communications. It could fit into our recruiting efforts, our recruiting materials. But alternatively, we could also think carefully about what we're trying to attract and who we're trying to attract, and make sure that these subgroups are valuing this flexibility benefit so that we can use this information to further attract the right candidates for our organization. So we could collect data from a variety of sources here to get this information. We could examine the employee experience data to ensure that there are differences across the stages of the employment life cycle, perceiving that to be. And we could also look at the engagement survey, but look at that within those focus groups. So again, keeping in mind that you can add filters to any of those heat maps. You can select any groups that are over 25 for those sub-reports. So there's a lot of different ways that at your fingertips, you can already start to look at some of these differences amongst demographic groups when you're looking at this on your own. And then we want to, of course, analyze those results. So just as there's many types of data to collect, to use, there are many ways that we can look at the data, of course. And there are many right answers. So here are just 2 examples listed here. So the first thing we could do is look across the employee experience moments. So again, that is just tracking the perceptions of valuing that work flexibility within person over time, and then comparing those moments will really help us understand if the individual who values flexibility are changing their opinions over time, or if there are demographic differences between people that make this benefit useful compared to those that don't see it. And then you can also, again, as I mentioned, look at that employee engagement data, where you'll have the capabilities to look at the differences impacted by different subgroups. So adding on some of those different demographic filters, looking at it from those perceptions. And then, of course, depending on your results, you can consider if these results matter, or if these differences, I should say, matter. So for instance, if flexibility only matters to, let's say, your mid-career employees, then is there something you may want to do? Like, as an organization, what do we do with those results? How do we demonstrate how career stages may leverage this benefit if it wasn't clear before? Was it something that wasn't brought up in recruitment? Was it something that wasn't introduced to a certain group? So making sure that there is even distribution of information across your organization. Or is it something that can be advertised to attract earlier career stage individuals who want to grow with the company, to include both recruitment and those long-term retention? So even once we get the information and we get these analyses back and we think about them, we have to start thinking about how do we use them best for our business to benefit from them as well. So we've chatted essentially about the main content on how to leverage that data to identify widely held strengths that matter to not only you, but to your employees from both an engagement and retention aspect. But let's also talk about what we do with that data. So the hardest work's done. We already have the data, we've looked through this, but it's only as good as our ability to essentially take that data and synthesize this information in something useful for your organization. So you can do all this, but if we don't do anything with it, we've put all this time and effort into it. So how do we take this information from what we've collected and translate it into an EVP? How do we take that EVP and then translate that into a digestible narrative for your organization so that folks can speak about it? And finally, once you define this and package it appropriately, what do you do with it next? So these are some of the things that we need to answer. So we need to put some effort into, of course, formally defining the EVP. And then we need to make that narrative accessible so that the work that we did is actually used and people can speak about it. And because the organization is living, breathing, and developing every day, we need to go back and plan to revisit this EVP on a schedule to make sure that what we defined is still accurate, that it's still relevant to our employees, that it's still even relevant and desirable to our employees and recruits in the future. So again, this is a continuous process. It's not necessarily this one and done process. It's something that we want to continue to focus on and go back and look at as well. So essentially what we ultimately need to do is we need to move from the conclusions that we've drawn from our listening strategy into concrete and operational EVPs. So after developing theories, hypotheses, you wade through those results, what do you conclude were your most valued benefits? This is a question you'll want to ask yourself. Are these benefits valued by the individuals that we want to retain? Are they valued by the employees that we want to attract? Make sure to link these benefits not only to your talent strategy, but also to your organization's mission. So we always want to be linking them back. And finally, when we think about this, how do these benefits differentiate your organization from your competitors? So being able to clearly articulate what makes your workplace special is the best way to start crafting your narrative towards those inspirational EVPs, getting ways for you to stand out as an organization. So this EVP brings in both business strategy as well as being part of a larger purpose or a better society and world. So on top of that, here they're both seeing leadership development and the fact that they develop leaders and that the leaders go on to be leaders elsewhere. So here's an idea of this unique one. This is just an example, again, of providing you with what these could look like in considering how do we do this. So now let's say we walk away, you develop your EVP, and now you have it. What do you do next? So you've spent so much time ensuring that the information is accurate, it captures those unique benefits that your organizations. Don't stop short of that finish line. Now we need to really put it to practice. We need to take it one step further. So this should be branded so that it holistically represents your organization, and then it should be shared easily and it should be shared often. So many organizations will use hashtags for their EVPs to encourage members to share them, to share testimonials about the benefits on, for example, social media, on LinkedIn. So a lot of times organizations will create these catchy phrases, these catchy hashtags to make sure that their folks are spreading this message. And most importantly, this needs to be shared and embedded into your recruiting strategy. So if we think about this, we can start to think about what are we currently doing? And these are questions you can all start to think and ask yourself, what are we currently doing in relation to this? What are we implementing? Where's an opportunity to grow and share with folks our EVP? So these are some areas that we can start to think about as we are wrapping up today. Here is an example also. Again, I just want to share a few examples as we're going through, because sometimes it's like almost in the clouds, right? Like this idea we're talking about, but without examples, it doesn't always feel as concrete. Here's another one of our clients, and Netflix incorporates, for example, a search bar for the jobs that appear in the way that they would as if you were browsing a movie or one of their shows. And additionally, they provide videos about their EVP, their mission statement to remain true to their video streaming service brand. So even the way that they present and communicate their EVP is consistent with who they are and how they brand themselves. So again, you're seeing that integration of that mission, that brand, the company, and going through that as well. So beginning and ending, again, with that listening strategy itself is going to be that idea here that you're seeing, that's continuous feedback loop. So it's basically here, and it is to anticipate organizational changes and leverage that feed so that those changes could then be integrated back into the strategy. So using this tool to revisit your EVP is a perfect use case for organizational data. So this just kind of shows you how this is always continuing and how you can always be updating it as well. So I'm going to pause here for the last 5 minutes and open it up to see if there are any questions anyone has, or again, if you don't want to stay on and you want to drop, I'm happy to stay and answer any questions even after folks need to exit as well.
Liz,
Well,
there's one question in the chat.
Okay.
How do you think about the EVP in terms of the value that is offered for Unilever? Can you help connect where those value points connect to the EVP statement?
Yeah, so let's go back. Okay, so let me go to the question, the value. So here they're thinking about it as that social side and investing. So when I think about this, so here when you join, it's not just a job, you're joining a movement to create a better business, a better world, and a better you. So when you look at, and this is again just a component of it, but when you look at their entire EVP here, it ties in that business strategy. So, and it also ties in the larger purpose to being a better society and a world. So how you're impacting folks outside of just who you are or your role as well. And they also talk about this idea of leadership development. So how we had talked about, career development being the driver, they talk a lot about their leadership development. And one of the things that, again, we don't have the whole EVP pulled up here, but one of the areas that they talk about is that they continue to put time, effort, and money and resources into developing these leaders. And the idea there isn't just to keep them at this organization, but for them to go out and use these skills to create that better world so that they go on to be leaders elsewhere as well. So this idea that you're just basically becoming a more mature, a more useful leader, not just for their organization, but they want to do good across. Let's see here. Any other questions? Let me go back to the chat here too and see. One of the questions was from Carrie that said, what if you want to have some churn? So my question here is this like you want folks to leave the organization, self-select out? I'm not quite sure when this question came up in the presentation to link it back. So if you would like to come off mute and explain, I'd be happy to answer. I can see that here. No problem. So you think it had to do with longevity, existing and new hires? So how I would think in terms of EVP into natural churn is EVP is basically saying who you are as an organization, what you value. And I think how you get some of that natural churn would be that misalignment. So the way I would think about it is if where there potentially could be an issue, if there was a misalignment between the employees and the organization, let's say recruitment efforts. So there wasn't correct job descriptions, any of those areas, for example, could have put someone into that organization where they didn't necessarily align with their job fit. I think that's where we see the number one level of churn. But when I think about it in relation to EVP, if the benefits that your organization are offering are not aligned with what you need as a person, as an employee at that time, that could impact it. So for example, if you needed flexibility because you couldn't work during traditional hours, for example, and you needed flexible working hours, and that wasn't an EVP that was offered, I could see churn happening there as well. But thinking about the idea of EVP is that we're recruiting talent that does align with who you are as an organization to increase that retention. So I would have to think about other ways that EVPs could maybe unintentionally cause churn. Small one. Yeah, so the follow-up was even thinking about how small organizations can only grow folks so far. So if we do think about that development perspective, there is definitely a ceiling effect that folks may hit at an organization, and we will see natural churn if there is nowhere for those folks to go from there, regardless of how great the benefits, how great the EVP is. At some point, we typically still see that churn within organizations. What I will say is if you have strong EVP, a lot of benefits, maybe areas that are competitive, is that it buffers or buys some additional time for those folks that maybe would have left an organization quicker if they didn't have additional development opportunities. So I could see it buying time or buffering that. And I know we are at 2 minutes past, so if anyone has to drop, please feel free, but I will stay on for another minute or two in case anyone else has any questions.
And I just want to say thank you to Liz and thank you to all of you for joining. And we'll be sending out the recording and the slides following the call today. So thank you again.
Thanks, Mia.